Hello, Frizzle fighters. So today I'm talking about all of the reasons and whys and where-to-fors that I do not finish books, and the data to prove that my decision is the right one. Because of course there's a discourse here in the bookish internet about should you always finish the books that you begin in order to have a sense of completion, in order to have a valid opinion on them, or should you just give up on books whenever you want. So today I'm going to be doing the DNF tag created by Gunpowder Fiction and Plot, and I'm going to be adding in a lot of my own asides and data and graphs and stuff as we go. So DNF means did not finish, so it's shorthand for not finishing a book. And the first question of this tag is, do you DNF? And my short answer is yes. My longer answer is, so far in the books I've read in 2024, 14% of them have been DNF'd. That is the pink slice of the pie here. We're going to be talking more about the other slices of the pie later, but that's the short answer. Yes, 14% of my reading is not finished. It's one of the things I track in my giant reading spreadsheet of, do I finish a book? And then I get to make a nice pie chart. I also track some other things that I want to tell you about. So as I'm reading a book, I generally give a book like at least 10%, and at that 10% mark, I check in with my predicted rating. So put that in my spreadsheet of, at 10%, how am I feeling about this book? Is it feeling like a 5-star book or is it feeling like a 2-star book? And then when I either finish the book or decide to be finished with the book, I give my final rating into the spreadsheet as well. And the reason that I decided to start tracking this stat is all because of the question of, if you're giving up on books, how do you know that they're bad? Maybe the ending is really great, maybe it gets a lot better. So then I wanted to track, if I'm at the beginning of a book, how accurately can I tell how I'm going to feel by the end of the book? Am I always spot on, or is it a total crapshoot and really my 10% check-ins mean nothing? So I wanted to get a better gauge of that, and here are the results. Here is the simple pie chart of the data, and then we're going to be getting into more of the data. So 63%, the teal slice of the pie here, is spot on. My predicted rating is the same as my ending rating. 30% of my reading, the pink slice of this pie, is a disappointment. I predict 5 stars, it's 4. I predict 4 stars, it's 3. I predict 3 stars, it's 1. And only 7% of the time, this brown slice, is the book a pleasant surprise? Does the rating at the end exceed my expectations from my 10% check-in? So I really like this data because it kind of validates my feelings of, but for most books you can tell if they're your taste or not by 10% in. And for most of those where I'm off, I am over-optimistic about the book. The book ends up being a disappointment. So no, I should not keep holding on for the 7% chance that the book goes up 1-star rating. If I'm feeling like it's a 1-star or a 2-star book, then best I can hope for is a 3-star, and that's not worth pressing through the entire book, in my opinion. So looking at this data a little bit more thoroughly, here it is on an XY axis graph. So the X-axis here along the bottom is my 10% check-in, and the y-axis up and down is my final rating. So you can see all of our pink dots of disappointment trailing down, the spot-on line in the middle there of teal, and the very few brown pleasant surprise dots up top. And you can also see from pleasant surprise that the surprise is never more than a 1-star boost. If at 10% in, I'm thinking, I'm not liking this book, it's not like it's gonna suddenly pull out and be a 5-star book. However, it has happened that at the beginning of the book, I'm feeling this is a 5-star book and it's 2 stars by the end. So, Question 2 of the tag, if you DNF a book, does it count towards books read for the month? If you began 10 books and you finished 8 of them and DNF'd 2, do you say I read 8 books or do you say I read 10 books? For me, I say I read 10 books. With a little caveat, and let me explain my stance on this. So the little caveat is, occasionally I will pick up a book and read 5 pages and know immediately this isn't for me, and I'll just DNF it and it'll never get entered into my spreadsheet. I won't count it as a book I read. But if I'm making it at least 15% into a book, I'll count it. And here are some of the reasons why I've decided to track my reading that way, even though it might not be the most accurate way to do it in some ways. I think it provides greater accuracy in other ways. So argument number one, even if I've DNF'd it, it's a book I'm going to talk about on my channel. Maybe it'll just be a little mention in a video, but I'm gonna at least mention it. So it makes sense for me to keep all of the books I'm going to mention organized together in the spreadsheet as my read books, together on my Goodreads as my read books. They're all the same category of books I'm going to review, even if I haven't finished all of them. I want to keep them all grouped together for clarity of my own sorting system. And on my spreadsheet and on Goodreads, I will tag the books as DNF'd, but they're all there under the red umbrella. And it's true that if someone else was like scrutinizing my Goodreads count or whatever, they might see these under the red category and feel that I'm being dishonest here. But that's also why in my reviews of the book, I usually try to call out, here's my little review of this book, DNF at 22%. And even though that review isn't for the entirety of the book, that doesn't mean it's not a useful review to someone. But in the end, even though my reading tracking is public out there on Goodreads, the tracking is more for me to keep myself all straight of which books I've read than for any of you guys. Like, the reviews are for you guys, the tracking is for me. And I just like keeping all the books together. So that's my choice. My next argument here is that I want my statistics to represent my reading. And my scores, such as my average star rating for the books I've read so far this year, would be unfairly inflated if I didn't include all my DNFs 1 and 2 stars in there. If I was throwing the DNFs out of my tracking of books, then yeah, my average star rating would skyrocket up. But that isn't actually representative of my experience of reading throughout the year. Once, a commenter said to me something like, "Oh, your average rating is so low, you should DNF more," which I thought was the weirdest comment because one, it was assuming I wasn't counting the DNFs towards my average star rating, which I totally do. And just assuming that DNFs shouldn't be rated at all, but I feel like giving a rating to a DNF is important because there is a difference between books I DNF and give 1 star and books that I DNF and give 2 stars. And I feel like if you're throwing out all of those low ratings, you're just cherry picking the data, trying to make it present as, oh, my average rating should be higher, I deserve better. But that's not how data science works. You can't just throw out the ratings that you don't like. So as someone who's been trained as a scientist, it honestly feels morally wrong to me to not count DNFs as part of your average ratings and all of your statistics of your reading. And I take my reading statistics seriously, as you can tell from this video. And the last reason why I've decided to count my DNFs towards my reading and statistics and tracking and everything is I don't want to incentivize myself to finish books I'm not liking. I want to give up on books that I'm not liking and not waste my time on them. We'll be talking more about the stats and details about that later. And I feel like if I had the rule for myself that I couldn't count a book as read unless I finished it, if I couldn't review a book unless I had finished it, then I'd be finishing a lot more books that I didn't want to finish. And I like to incentivize myself instead to be able to freely DNF with no complications. Question 3 of the tag is there a difference between DNF and just putting it down for a bit? So technically yes, but practically most of the time, no. Sometimes if I'm in the middle of reading a book and life will get in the way, for example, I've got it checked out from the library and my loan expires and I have to return the book and I don't get to finish it, technically that is putting it down for now. But also, I'm trying to get back to it ASAP. I'm immediately putting that book back on hold from the library, and I'm going to be finishing it within the month. So I don't even see that as any form of DNFing. It's just a slight pause in the reading, but I'm always actively feeling like I'm currently reading the book. And for me, I never really, I guess if we're phrasing it unkindly, lie to myself and say oh, I'm just putting this book down for a bit and then it's been years since I've touched it. Guys, if you're doing that, that's just a DNF. And you're allowed to pick back up your DNFs, but I only read 1 or 2 books at a time. So if I'm deciding to put it down in order to pick up another book, I'm putting that book down forever. That's a DNF. No intention to come back to it. Sometimes I do. And we'll talk more about that in a few minutes. Question 4. What popular books have you DNF'd? Some popular books that I have DNF'd include The Unhoneymooners, Better Than the Movies, Firestarter, A Long Way to a Small Angry Planet, The Toll, which is Scythe book number 3, Belladonna, and Take a Hint, Danny Brown. Those are all public on my Goodreads. Now, here's a time for a confession, because as I was searching for popular books that I've DNF'd, I realized that there is a popular book that I DNF'd, and I read a good chunk of the book, so it should be tracked on my Goodreads somewhere. But I was so embarrassed at the time to say that I hated this book that I didn't put it publicly on the internet that I was even trying it. But now it is time for me to speak my truth and tell you about the very popular book that I DNF'd, which is the Heartstopper comics. Now, I gave these ones a fair shot, and let me tell you about my experience. So these are the cutesy queer romance high school graphic novels. They have a very popular adaptation, etc. So I picked up the first one and I started reading it and I was like, this book is so boring. Like, I don't see what other people see in it. I was just like, this is boring. Like, nothing was happening. It was like, I guess, like, cutesy, but not in a way that I was excited about. It was just boring. And then the book got a little bit of conflict. And the conflict is one of our characters is gay and being bullied and ostracized for this at school. And like, that was really stressful for me as someone who has some history of being bullied at school. And it was honestly triggering for me. So the book had like 2 modes, boring and triggering. And I was like, I am having zero fun reading this. So I didn't finish it. I did read part of volume 1, and I think I tried to pick up part of volume 3 and had the same problem. So, like, I guess I can understand conceptually why people like it, but for me, it was just the worst mix of negative feelings all around. So, no. Question 5. What book do you wish you had DNF'd? The simple answer to this question is anything I've given 1 or 2 stars that I finished. For a specific answer, I think 2 books stand out in my mind, that I gave them both 1 star, but I read the entirety of them. The first one is Fahrenheit 451. I thought that book was so boring. And I understand why it's so, like, popular and important because it's got a great message of anti-censorship and the importance of books. Yay! But, like, that book is so boring. And I pressed through it because it was such an important book and I hated all of it. So, yeah. Another book is 𝐂𝐀𝐏, which I read last year and was like my worst book of the year, but I kept pressing through it because I kept thinking it was going to get better and it never did. It just kept getting worse. And this fits into a larger goal of mine. Let's return to here this pie chart where the blue books, 80% of my reading are books that I liked and finished. 3 stars and up, finished them, good. The pink slice, 14% of my reading, books that I DNF'd. I'm feeling good about those too. The slice of this pie that I'm not feeling good about is the brown slice, 6.4% of my reading, which is books that I finished but did not like. Because I would prefer for that slice to be 0. If I'm not liking a book, I don't want to finish it. But a lot of books, I keep thinking like maybe it'll get better, which I know is such like a foolish idea, but I keep doing it. And actually in the last few months, I've been doing a lot worse at this than I've historically done, so I really need to turn that around. Question 6. Do you ever reattempt to read a DNF? Has that ever been successful for you? Yes, and yes, but most of the time, no. Recently, I tried to reattempt the DNF of Lord of the Rings. It did not go well. There's an entire video of me reading and hating that book if you want to watch it. But there are a few books in my past that I tried to pick up, DNF'd them early, and then later picked up again, and they became 5-star favorites, which is so interesting. So I am willing to sometimes reattempt a DNF, but it does need to be a very particular type of book. And I was thinking a lot about this. And I've got a selection of books to present to you because I was going through my 5 stars, all of my favorite books of the last few years, and thinking if someone came to me and said, I read the first chapter of that one and I didn't like it, it wasn't for me, so I gave up. Are there any books in my favorites that I would then say to this hypothetical person, no, don't DNF that one, continue on for X amount more chapters before you can really tell if it's for you. And I have 4 to present to you that I think fall under that umbrella. The first is War for the Oaks, which is a book when I was younger, I read the first chapter of, thought it was boring, gave up, and then reattempted semi-recently and loved it so much. And yes, even on the reread, the first chapter was kind of confusing and boring, but it did pick up pretty good after there. I would say give War for the Oaks at least halfway through. But if you've made it halfway through and you're thinking this isn't for me, then like, it's totally okay to DNF that one. The next book is also one where I read the first chapter, didn't like it, gave up, and then picked it up years later and loved it, which is The Aeronaut's Windlass. The first chapter is from a perspective of a character who is quite annoying, and that's why I gave up on it in the first place, but the whole book is not from that character's perspective. So I would say for this book, hold on, read at least a few chapters, get a few of the different characters' perspectives, and then see if you like it or not. And I will say, even that really annoying character, by the end of the book, she had grown on me quite a bit. So, the next book on the list is Piranesi. I did read through the entirety of this book when I first picked it up, but I do think that the first chapter is more boring than the rest of the chapters. I'd say read at least 2 chapters of Piranesi before DNFing. And finally, the Animorphs series, one of my favorite series of all time, from my childhood, from my teen years, from my rereads. I love them. But if someone came to me and said, oh yeah, I read half of book 1 and I didn't like it, it wasn't for me, and gave up, I would say, come on, the book is like 150 pages long. Read the first book. Then you can decide if you want to DNF the series or not. Because Animorphs is a series of books for children. It gets kind of goofy and juvenile a lot of the time, but there's also a lot of serious topics and stakes that are at play in the series that you don't really see come into play until the end of book 1. So I think you have to read the entirety of book 1 before deciding if you want to continue on the series or not. Which I know, compared to the other books that I've just named where I'm like, read 3 chapters, is a big ask, but it is a very short, quick read. So, question 7, what do you do with books you DNF? So for me, this is pretty easy because I don't really buy physical books unless they're like already an all-time favorite and I want to own them. So most of the books I just get from my local library, borrow them. So then if I DNF it, I just return it to the library. Sometimes I do buy ebooks, and I'm totally fine with the ebooks that I've DNF'd just living in my ebook library. So I don't really have the conundrum of, do I want to keep these books sitting on my shelf space or not? Question 8. Do you choose more or less risky titles because of your stance on DNFing? This is part of the magic of being free with my DNFing for me, because I do feel free to pick up a book and read 10% of it and give up on it if I want. And that does help me be more risky with my book choices, where I can better feel like I'm safe going outside my comfort zone. And then if it felt like it was too far outside my comfort zone, I could reel it back in really easy. I don't have to commit to a whole book or even a whole series. DNFing in this way is a form of self-care and a healthy reading life, because it does allow you to be more explorative in your reading if you're willing to make it a lower commitment thing. If every book I picked up was the high commitment, I need to finish this, then I would not be as exploratory or risky with my reading, and especially not for longer books. I would not be exploring and picking up a long book, probably ever. Kind of the larger argument against DNFing of, but what if the book gets better? Right? It's like that fear of missing out on the ending of a good book. And I would counter that question with a question of my own. Or what if, by DNFing books, you get time to read more books? And those more books you get to read are better than the ones you're DNFing. So here's my calculations for that. Remember, I'm only DNFing like 14% of my reading. Like, it's not that large of a percentage as far as these things go. But just this year, by DNFing, I have saved myself from reading 5,124 pages. Where if I had never DNF'd books, I would have read 5,124 more pages of those books that I was not liking. And that 5,124 pages is 17 extra books that I have read this year alone, because of my DNF policy. So by allowing myself to give up on books whenever I want to, I have made room in my life for picking up 17 more books. And it's true that not all of those 17 books were good books, right? But by my usual rate of finding 5 stars, 2 of those 17 books were 5 stars. Deciding whether or not to DNF becomes the very easy weighing of the options. Would you rather finish all of these books you were already not enjoying, or take a chance on 17 more books, 2 of which are going to be 5 stars? And for me, that's an easy answer. I'm going to read the books that have the 5-star potential when the DNFs do not. And if you are a book content creator and want to do this tag, feel free, because it's a really fun one. And as much as I have bashed on the idea of people who never DNF in this video, I do really enjoy watching this tag from that perspective because it's interesting. If you liked watching this video, I think you'll really enjoy some of my other book stats videos like this one. Thank you for watching.